friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to deal with when you're well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Before we get on with the show, I'd like to take a couple of minutes of your time. Every week I tell you about how the show is brought to you by direct financial support from listeners like you, mostly on Patreon. But a good number of people also throw a few dollars my way every month via Buy Me a Coffee or even the PayPal tip jar on the website. Because I hear from people all the time how valuable they find the show and how useful it is to them. And I'm grateful to those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going and help me to continue to reach new audiences. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you to deal with sleeplessness, and you would like to support the show, and of course, most importantly, if you can and you can afford it, please take a look at patreon.com/sleepytimetales, or check out the link in the show notes or go from the website to take a look. There are bonuses available there from $2 and up, including early release of the main episodes, bonus episodes, special edits, and monthly megasodes, which are everything all in one file, very easy for you to download and listen to, for those nights where you really struggle to sleep. Or if making a monthly commitment seems a bit much, then there's also the option to make a once-off contribution at Buy Me a Coffee. Also linked in the show notes, and you can go to buymeacoffee.com/sleepytimetales, and there you can help the show out with it without even needing to subscribe to anything. But another huge way to help the show, maybe even a bigger way, is to spread the word. If you know anybody who struggles to sleep, if there's someone, a co-worker or a member of your family, someone on the bus who mentions they're struggling, just mention to them that this is an option. If you recommend the show on social media, please make sure to tag me in so that I can see and I can thank you. That's at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. And of course, last but not least, I need to shout out the music, which is Sweet Nights and Friends by Kumiku. Their music is available on their website at loyaltyfreakmusic.com. And I've linked their website in the show notes so that you can check out what's some very cool stuff that they release under different names depending on the style that I recommend taking a look. Thank you for your time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? What is this strange idea, this podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to? But in the 21st century, lack of sleep is a health crisis. And this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. Sleepy Time Tales is intended mostly to be used as a distraction to what keeps you awake at night. Or maybe sometimes something more like background noise or even company. That's why I make these episodes quite long, so that I'm here for you, helping you, being present for you, without putting any pressure and of the feeling of the end of the episode coming. Now, as far as I know, there are a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, with the sleep podcast that I listen to, I need something to focus on. A story or an event that lets me keep my mind on a specific point, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxiety. To focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for me. A second way is some people just need some background noise, some kind of white noise like the sound of the wind in the trees, or rain, or the ocean, or just some boring dude droning on in the background. But however you engage with the show and engage with listening to me, the important thing is don't force the sleep. Just allow a light mental grip, or just rather keep a light mental grip on the thread of the story and of my voice, and allow the need for sleep to come for you. Now I'm hoping you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it's important you don't feel pressurized. Odds are actually if this is your first night listening, it's probably not going to work for you. It's possible my accent is strange to you, maybe one episode isn't long enough, maybe you need some time to get used to listening to my voice. Or maybe your problem isn't so much going to sleep. Maybe your problem is waking up in the middle of the night. What I recommend in that case is just letting the show run. Maybe download a few episodes and put them in a playlist and let them go and allow yourself to fall asleep. Then if you wake up in the middle of the night and the stream is still running, you can just carry on listening and fall back to sleep again. It's very important though, however you engage with the show, is that you try to relax. If you're new to it and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this will probably seem strange to you. So just give it a chance. Because I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. Cosmos, a sketch of the physical description of the universe, Volume 1, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translator's Preface. I cannot more appropriately introduce the cosmos than by presenting a brief sketch of the life of its illustrious author. While the name of Alexander von Humboldt is familiar to everyone, few perhaps aware of the peculiar circumstances of his scientific career, and of the extent of his labors in almost every department of physical knowledge. He was born on the 14th of September, 1769, and is therefore now in his 80th year. After going through the ordinary course of education at Göttingen, and having made a rapid tour through Holland, England, and France, he became a pupil of Werner at the mining school of Freiburg, and in his 21st year published an essay on the basalts of the Rhine. Though he soon became officially connected with the mining corps, he was enabled to continue his excursions in foreign countries. For during the 6 or 7 years succeeding the publication of his first essay, he seemed to have visited Austria, Switzerland, Italy, and France. His attention to mining did not, however, prevent him from devoting his attention to other scientific pursuits, among which botany and the then recent discovery of galvanism may be especially noticed. Botany, indeed, we know from his own authority, occupied him almost exclusively for some years. But even at this time he was practicing the use of those astronomical and physical instruments which he afterward turned to so singularly excellent an account. The political disturbances of the civilized world at the close of the last century prevented our author from carrying out various plans of foreign travel, which he had contemplated, and detained him an unwilling prisoner in Europe. In the year 1799, he went to Spain, with the hope of entering Africa from Cadiz, but the unexpected patronage which he received at the court of Madrid led to a great alteration in his plans, and decided him to proceed directly to the Spanish possessions in America, and there gratify the longings for foreign adventure and the scenery of the tropics which had haunted him from boyhood, but had all been turned in the diametrically opposite direction of Asia. After encountering various risks of capture, he succeeded in reaching America, and from 1799 to 1804 prosecuted there extensive researches in the physical geography of the New World, which has indelibly stamped his name in the undying records of science. Excepting an excursion to Naples with Gay-Lussac and von Buch in 1805, the year after his return from America, the succeeding 20 years of his life were spent in Paris, and were almost exclusively employed in editing the results of his American journey. In order to bring these results before the world in a manner worthy of their importance, he commenced a series of gigantic publications in almost every branch of science on which he had instituted observations. In 1817, after 12 years of incessant toil, 4/5 were completed, and an ordinary copy of the part then in print cost considerably more than £100 sterling. Since that time, the publication has gone on more slowly, and even now, after the lapse of nearly half a century, it remains, and probably ever will remain, incomplete. In the year 1828, when the greatest portion of his literary labor had been accomplished, he undertook a scientific journey to Siberia, under the special protection of the Russian government. In this journey, a journey for which he had prepared himself by a course of study unparalleled in the history of travel, he was accompanied by 2 companions hardly less distinguished than himself, Ehrenberg and Gustav Rose. And the results obtained during these expeditions are recorded by our author in his Fragments Asiatiques and in his Asie Centrale, and by Rose in his Reisung nach dem Ural. If the Asie Centrale had been his only work, constituting, as it does, an epitome of all the knowledge acquired by himself and by former travellers on the physical geography of northern and central Asia, that work alone would have sufficed to form a reputation of the highest order. I proceed to offer a few remarks on the work of which I now present a new translation to the English public, a work intended by its author to embrace a summary of physical knowledge, as connected with the delineation of the material universe. The idea of such a physical description of the universe had, it appears, been present to his mind from a very early epoch. It was a work which he felt he must accomplish, and he devoted almost a lifetime to the accumulation of materials for it. For almost half a century it had occupied his thoughts, and at length, in the evening of life, he felt himself rich enough in the accumulation of thought, travel, reading, and experimental research to reduce into form and reality the undefined vision that had so long floated before him. The work, when completed, will form 3 volumes. The first volume comprises a sketch of all that is at present known of the physical phenomena of the universe. The second comprehends 2 distinct parts, the first of which treats of the incitements to the study of nature, afforded in descriptive poetry, landscape painting, and the cultivation of exotic plants, while the second and larger part enters into the consideration of the various epochs of the progress of discovery and the corresponding stages of advance in human civilization. The third volume, the publication of which, as Monsieur Humboldt himself informs me in a letter addressed to my learned friend and publisher, Mr. H. G. Bone, has been somewhat delayed, owing to the present state of public affairs, will comprise the special and scientific development of the great picture of nature. Each of the 3 parts of the cosmos is therefore, to a certain extent, distinct in its object, and may be considered complete in itself. We cannot better terminate this brief notice than in the words of one of the most eminent philosophers of our own country, that, should the conclusion correspond, as we doubt not, with these beginnings, a work will have been accomplished every way worthy of the author's fame, and a crowning laurel added to the wreath with which Europe will always delight to surround the name of Alexander von Humboldt, In venturing to appear before the English public as the interpreter of the great work of our age, I have been encouraged by the assistance of many kind literary and scientific friends, and I gladly avail myself of this opportunity of expressing my deep obligations to Mr. Brooke, Mr. Day, Professor Edward Forbes, Mr. Hyde, Mr. Glacier, Dr. Percy, and Mr. Ronalds for the valuable aid they have afforded me. It would be scarcely right to conclude these remarks without a reference to the translations that have preceded mine. The translation executed by Mrs. Sabine is singularly accurate and elegant. The other translation is remarkable for its opposite qualities, and may therefore be passed over in silence. The present volumes differ from those of Mrs. Sabine in having all the foreign measures converted into corresponding English terms, in being published at considerably less than 1/3 of the price, and in being a translation of the entire work, for I have not conceived myself justified in omitting passages, sometimes amounting to pages, simply because they might be deemed slightly obnoxious to our national prejudices. Author's Preface. In the late evening of an active life, I offer to the German public a work whose undefined image has floated before my mind for almost half a century. I have frequently looked upon its completion as impracticable, but as often as I have been disposed to relinquish the undertaking, I have again, though perhaps imprudently, resumed the task. This work I now present to my contemporaries with a diffidence inspired by a just mistrust of my own powers, while I would willingly forget that writings long expected are usually received with less indulgence. Though the outward relations of life and an irresistible impulse toward knowledge of various kinds have led me to occupy myself for many years, and apparently exclusively, with separate branches of science, as for instance with descriptive botany, geognosy, chemistry, astronomical determination of position, and terrestrial magnetism, in order that I might the better prepare myself for the extensive travels in which I was desirous of engaging. The actual object of my studies has nevertheless been of a higher character. The principal impulse by which I was directed was the earnest endeavor to comprehend the phenomena of physical objects in their general connection, and to represent nature as one great whole, moved and animated by internal forces. My intercourse with highly gifted men early led me to discover that without an earnest striving to attain to a knowledge of special branches of study, all attempts to give a grand and general view of the universe would be nothing more than a vain illusion. These special departments in the great domain of natural science are moreover capable of being reciprocally fructified by means of the appropriative forces by which they are endowed. Descriptive botany, no longer confined to the narrow circle of determination of genera and species, leads the observer who traverses distant lands and lofty mountains to the study of the geographical distribution of plants of the Earth's surface, according to distance from the equator and vertical elevation above the sea. It is further necessary to investigate the laws which regulate the differences of temperature and climate, and the meteorological processes of the atmosphere, before we can hope to explain the involved causes of vegetable distribution. And it is thus that the observer who earnestly pursues the path of knowledge is led from one class of phenomena to another, by means of the mutual dependence and connection existing between them. I have enjoyed an advantage which few scientific travelers have shared to an equal extent, viz., that of having seen not only littoral districts, such as are alone visited by the majority of those who take part in voyages of circumnavigation, but also those portions of the interior of two vast continents, which present the most striking contrasts manifested in the alpine tropical landscapes of South America and the dreary wastes of the steppes of northern Asia. Travels undertaken in districts such as these would not fail to encourage the natural tendency of my mind towards a generalization of views, and to encourage me to attempt, in a special work, to treat of the knowledge which we at present possess, regarding the sidereal and terrestrial phenomena of the cosmos and their empirical relations. The hitherto undefined idea of a physical geography has thus, by an extended and perhaps too boldly imagined a plan, been comprehended under the idea of a physical description of the universe, embracing all created things in the region of space and in the earth. The very abundance of the materials which are presented to the mind for arrangement and definition necessarily impart no inconsiderable difficulties in the choice of the form under which such a work must be presented, if it would aspire to the honor of being regarded as a literary composition. Descriptions of nature ought not to be deficient in a tone of lifelike truthfulness, while the mere enumeration of a series of general results is productive of no less wearing impression than the elaborate accumulation of the individual data of observation. I scarcely venture to hope that I have succeeded in satisfying these various requirements of composition, or that I have myself avoided the shoals and breakers which I know how to indicate to others. My faint hope of success rests upon the special indulgence which the German public have bestowed upon a small work bearing the title of Ancien de Nature, which I published soon after my return from Mexico. This work treats, under various general points of view, of separate branches of physical geography, such as the forms of vegetation, grassy plains, and deserts. The effect produced by this small volume has doubtlessly been more powerfully manifested in the influence it has exercised on the sensitive minds of the young, whose imaginative faculties are so strongly manifested that by means of anything which it could in self impart. In the work on the cosmos on which I am now engaged, I have endeavored to show, as in that entitled Ancien de Nature, that a certain degree of scientific completeness in the treatment of individual facts is not wholly incompatible with the picturesque animation of style. Since public lectures seem to me to present an easy and efficient means of testing the more or less successful manner of connecting together the detached branches of any one science, I undertook for many months consecutively, first in the French language at Paris, and afterwards in my own native German at Berlin, almost simultaneously at two different places of assembly, to deliver a course of lectures on the physical description of the universe, according to my conception of the science. My lectures were given extemporaneously in both French and German, and without the aid of written notes. Nor have I, in any way, made use in the present work of those portions of my discourses which have been preserved by the industry of certain attentive auditors. With the exception of the first 40 pages, the whole of the present work was written, for the first time, in the years 1843 and 1844. A character of unity, freshness, and animation must, I think, be derived from an association with some definite epoch, where the object of the writer is to delineate the present condition of knowledge and opinions. Since the additions constantly made to the latter to give rise to fundamental changes in pre-existing views, my lectures and the cosmos have nothing in common beyond the succession in which the various facts are treated. The first portion of my work contains introductory considerations regarding the diversity and the degrees of enjoyment to be derived from nature, and the knowledge of the laws by which the universe is governed. It also considers the limitation and scientific mode of treating a physical description of the universe, and gives a general picture of nature, which contains a view of all the phenomena comprised in the cosmos. This general picture of nature, which embraces within its wide scope the remotest nebulous spots, and the revolving double stars in the regions of space, no less than the telluric phenomena included under the department of the geography of organic forms, such as plants, animals, and races of men, comprises all that I deem most especially important with regard to the connection existing between generalities and specialities, while it moreover exemplifies, by the form and style of the composition, the mode of treatment pursued in the selection of the results obtained from experimental knowledge. The two succeeding volumes will contain a consideration of the particular means of incitement towards the study of nature, consisting in animated delineations, landscape painting, and the arrangement and cultivation of exotic vegetable forms, of the history of the contemplation of the universe, or the gradual development of the reciprocal action of natural forces, constituting one natural whole. And lastly, of the special branches of the several departments of science, whose mutual connection is indicated in the beginning of the work. Wherever it has been possible to do so, I have adduced the authorities from whence I derived my facts, with a view of affording testimony both to the accuracy of my statements and to the value of the observations to which the reference was made. In those instances where I have quoted from my own writings, the facts contained in which being, from their very nature, scattered through different portions of my works, I have always referred to the original editions, owing to the importance of accuracy with regard to numerical relations, and to my own distrust of the care and correctness of translators. In the few cases where I have extracted short passages from the works of my friends, I have indicated them by marks of quotation, and in imitation of the practice of the ancients, I have invariably preferred the repetition of the same words to any arbitrary substitution of my own paraphrases. The much contested question of priority of claim to a first discovery, which is so dangerous to treat of in a work of this uncontroversial kind, has rarely been touched upon. While I have occasionally referred to classical antiquity and to that happy period of transition which has rendered the 16th and 17th centuries so celebrated, owing to the great geographical discoveries by which the age was characterized, I have been simply led to adopt this mode of treatment, from the desire we experience from time to time, when considering the general views of nature, to escape from the circle of more strictly dogmatical modern opinions, and enter the free and fanciful domain of earlier presentiments. It has frequently been regarded as a subject of discouraging consideration that while purely literary products of intellectual activity are rooted in the depths of feeling and interwoven with the creative force of imagination, all works treating of empirical knowledge and of the connection of natural phenomena and physical laws are subject to the most marked modifications of form in the lapse of short periods of time, both by the improvement of the instruments used and by the consequent expansion of the field of view open to rational observation. And that those scientific works which have, to use a common expression, become antiquated by the acquisition of new funds of knowledge, are thus continually being consigned to oblivion as unreadable. However discouraging such a prospect must be, no one who is animated by genuine love of nature, and by a sense of the dignity attached to its study, can view with regret anything which promises future additions and a greater degree of perfection to general knowledge. Many important branches of knowledge have been based upon a solid foundation which will not easily be shaken, both as regards the phenomena in regions of space and on the earth, while there are other portions of science in which general views will undoubtedly take the place of merely special, when new forces will be discovered and new substances will be made known, and where those which are now considered as simple will be decomposed. I would, therefore, venture to hope that an attempt to delineate nature in all its vivid animation and exalted grandeur, and to trace the stable amid the vacillating, ever-recurring alteration of physical metamorphoses, will not be wholly disregarded, even at a future date. Potsdam, November, 1844. Cosmos. A Sketch of the Physical Description of the Universe, Volume 1, by Alexander von Humboldt. Translated by E.C. Otti. From the 1858 Harpers and Brothers edition of Cosmos, Volume 1. Introduction. In attempting, after a long absence from my native country, to develop the physical phenomena of the globe, and the simultaneous action of the forces that pervade the regions of space, I experience a twofold cause of anxiety. The subject before me is so inexhaustible and so varied that I fear either to fall into the superficiality of the encyclopedist or to weary the mind of my reader by aphorisms consisting of mere generalities, clothed in dry and dogmatical forms. Undue conciseness often checks the flow of expression, while diffuseness is alike detrimental to a clear and precise exposition of our ideas. Nature is a free domain, and the profound conceptions and enjoyments she awakens within us can only be vividly delineated by thought, clothed in exalted forms of speech, worthy of bearing witness to the majesty and greatness of the creation. In considering the study of physical phenomena, not merely in its bearings on the material wants of life, but in its general influence on the intellectual advancement of mankind, we find its noblest and most important result to be a knowledge of the chain of connection, by which all natural forces are linked together and made mutually dependent upon each other. And it is the perception of these relations that exalts our views and ennobles our enjoyments. Such a result can, however, only be reaped as the fruit of observation and intellect, combined with the spirit of the age, in which are reflected all the varied phases of thought. He who can trace, through bygone times, the stream of our knowledge to its primitive source, will learn from history how, for thousands of years, man has labored, amid the ever-recurring changes of form, to recognize the invariability of natural laws, and has thus, by the force of mind, gradually subdued a great portion of the physical world to his dominion. In interrogating the history of the past, we trace the mysterious course of ideas yielding the first glimmering perception of the same image of the cosmos, or harmoniously ordered whole, which dimly shadowed forth to the human mind in the primitive age of the world, is now fully revealed to the mature intellect of mankind as a result of long and laborious observation. Each of these epochs of the contemplation of the external world, the earliest dawn of thought and the advanced age of civilization, has its own source of enjoyment. In the former, this enjoyment, in accordance with the simplicity of the primitive ages, flowed from an intuitive feeling of the order that was proclaimed by the invariable and successive reappearance of the heavenly bodies, and by the progressive development of organized beings, while in the latter this sense of enjoyment springs from a definite knowledge of the phenomena of nature. When man began to interrogate nature, and not content with observing, learned to evoke phenomena under definite conditions, when once he sought to collect and record facts, in order that the fruit of his labors might aid investigation after his own brief existence had passed away. The philosophy of nature cast aside the vague and poetic garb in which she had been enveloped from her origin, and, having assumed a severer aspect, she now weighs the value of observations and substitutes induction and reasoning for conjecture and assumption. The dogmas of former ages survive now only in the superstitions of the people and the prejudices of the ignorant, or are perpetuated in a few systems, which, conscious of their weakness, shroud themselves in a veil of mystery. We may also trace the same primitive intuitions in languages exuberant in figurative expressions, and a few of the best chosen symbols engendered by the happy inspiration of the earliest ages, having by degrees lost their vagueness through a better mode of interpretation, are still preserved among our scientific terms. Nature, considered rationally, that is to say, submitted to the process of thought, is a unity in diversity of phenomena, a harmony blending together all created things, however dissimilar in form and attributes, one great whole, animated by the breath of life. The most important result of a rational inquiry into nature is therefore to establish the unity and harmony of this stupendous mass of force and matter, to determine with impartial justice what is due to the discoveries of the past and to those of the present, and to analyze the individual parts of natural phenomena without succumbing beneath the weight of the whole. Thus, and thus alone, is it permitted to man, while mindful of the high density of his race, to comprehend nature, to lift the veil that shrouds her phenomena, and, as it were, submit the results of observation to the test of reason and of intellect. In reflecting upon the different degrees of enjoyment presented to us in the contemplation of nature, we find that the first place must be assigned to a sensation, which is wholly independent of an intimate acquaintance with the physical phenomena presented to our view, or of the peculiar character of the region surrounding us. In the uniform plain bounded only by a distant horizon, where the lowly heather, the cistus or waving grasses deck the soil. On the ocean shore where the waves softly rippling over the beach leave a track, green with the weeds of the sea. Everywhere, the mind is penetrated by the same sense of the grandeur and vast expanse of nature, revealing to the soul, by mysterious inspiration, the existence of laws that regulate the forces of the universe. Mere communion with nature, mere contact with the free air, exercise a soothing yet strengthening influence on the wearied spirit, calm the storm of passion and soften the heart when shaken by sorrow to its inmost depths. Everywhere, in every region of the globe, in every stage of intellectual culture, the same sources of enjoyment are alike vouchsafed to man. The earnest and solemn thoughts awakened by communion with nature intuitively arise from a presentiment of the order and harmony pervading the whole universe, and from the contrast we draw between the narrow limits of our own existence and the image of infinity revealed on every side. Whether we look upwards to the starry vaults of heaven, scan the far-reaching plain before us, or seek to trace the dim horizon across the vast expanse of ocean. The contemplation of the individual characteristics of the landscape and of the conformation of the land in any definite region of the earth gives rise to a different source of enjoyment, awakening impressions that are more vivid, better defined, and more congenial to certain phases of the mind than those of which we have already spoken. At one time, the heart is stirred by a sense of the grandeur of the face of nature, by the strife of the elements, or, as in northern Asia, by the aspect of the dreary barrenness of the far-stretching steppes. At another time, softer emotions are excited by the contemplation of rich harvests wrested by the hand of man from the wild fertility of nature, or by the sight of human habitations raised beside some wild and foaming torrent. Here I regard less the degree of intensity than the difference existing in the various sensations that derive their charm and permanence from the peculiar character of the scene. If I might be allowed to abandon myself to the recollections of my own distant travels, I would instance, among the most striking scenes of nature, the calm sublimity of a tropical night, when the stars, not sparkling as in our northern skies, shed their soft and planetary light over the gently heaving ocean. Or I would recall the deep valleys of the Cordilleras, where the tall and slender palms pierce the leafy veil around them, and waving on high their feathery and arrow-like branches, for, as it were, a forest above a forest. Or I would describe the summit of the peak of Tenerife, when a horizontal layer of clouds, dazzling in the whiteness, has separated the cone of cinders from the plain below, and suddenly the ascending current pierces the cloudy veil, so that the eye of the traveller may range from the brink of the crater, along the vine-clad slopes of Orotava, to the orange gardens and banana groves that skirt the shore. In scenes like these, it is not the peaceful charm uniformly spread over the face of nature that moves the heart, but rather the peculiar physiognomy and conformation of the land, the features of the landscape, the ever-varying outline of the clouds and their blending with the horizon of the sea, whether it lies spread before us like a smooth and shining mirror, or is dimly seen through the morning mist. All that the senses can but imperfectly comprehend, all that is most awful in such romantic scenes of nature, may become a source of enjoyment to man. By opening a wide field to the creative powers of his imagination, impressions change with the varying movements of the mind, and we are led by happy illusion to believe that we receive from the external world that with which we have ourselves invested in it. When far from our native country, after a long voyage, we tread for the first time the soil of a tropical land. We experience a certain feeling of surprise and gratification in recognizing in the rocks that surround us the same inclined schistostrata and the same columnar basalt covered with cellular amygdaloids that we had left in Europe, and whose identity of character and attitude so widely different remind us that the solidification of the Earth's crust is altogether independent of climatic influences. But these rocky masses of schist and of basalt are covered with vegetation of a character with which we are unacquainted, and of a physiognomy wholly unknown to us. And it is then, amid the colossal and majestic forms of an exotic flora, that we feel how wonderfully the flexibility of our nature fits us to receive new impressions, linked together by certain secret analogy. We so readily perceive the affinity existing among all forms of organic life, that although the sight of a vegetation similar to that of our native country might at first be most welcome to the eye, as the sweet familiar sounds of our mother tongue are to the ear, we nevertheless, by degrees and almost imperceptibly, become familiarized with a new home and a new climate. As a true citizen of the world, man everywhere habituates himself to that which surrounds him. Yet fearful, as it were, of breaking the links of association that bind him to the home of his childhood, the colonist applies to some few plants in a far distant clime the names he has been familiar with in his native land. And by the mysterious relations existing among all types of organization, the forms of exotic vegetation present themselves to his mind as nobler and more perfect developments of those he had loved in earlier days. Thus do the spontaneous impressions of the untutored mind lead, like the laborious deductions of cultivated intellect, to the same intimate persuasion that one sole and indissoluble chain binds together all nature. It may seem a rash attempt to endeavor to separate into its physical elements the magic power exercised upon our minds by the physical world, since the character of the landscape and of every imposing scene in nature depends so materially upon the mutual relation of the ideas and sentiments simultaneously excited in the mind of the observer. The powerful effect exercised by nature springs, as it were, from the connection and unity of the impressions and emotions produced, and we can only trace the different sources by analyzing the individuality of objects and the diversity of forces. The richest and most varied elements for pursuing an analysis of this nature present themselves to the eyes of the traveler in the scenery of southern Asia, in the great Indian archipelago, and more especially too in the new continent, where the summits of the lofty Cordilleras penetrate the confines of the aerial oceans surrounding our globe, and where the same subterranean forces that once raised these mountain chains still shake them to their foundation and threaten their downfall. Graphic delineations of nature, arranged according to systematic views, are not only suited to please the imagination, but may also, when properly considered, indicate the grades of the impressions of which I have spoken, from the uniformity of the seashore or the barren steppes of Siberia, to the inexhaustible fertility of the torrid zone. If we were even to picture to ourselves Mount Pilatus placed on the Schreckhorn, or the Schneekopper of Silesia on Mont Blanc, we should not have attained to the height of the great Colossus of the Andes, or Mount Athos, on the summit of the Chimborazo, in order to form a just estimate of the elevation of the Dhawalagiri, the highest point of the Himalaya. But although the mountains of India greatly surpass the Cordilleras of South America by their astonishing elevation, after which being long contested, there has at last been confirmed by accurate measurements, they cannot, from their geographical position, present the same inexhaustible variety of phenomena by which the latter are characterized. The impression produced by the grander aspects of nature does not depend exclusively on height. The chain of the Himalaya is placed far beyond the limits of the torrid zone, and scarcely is a solitary palm tree to be found in the beautiful valleys of Kumaon and Garhwal. Moreover, on the southern declivity of the Himalaya, where the ascending current deposits the exhalations rising from a vigorous Indian vegetation, the region of perpetual snow begins at an elevation of 11,000 or 12,000 feet above the level of the sea, thus setting a limit to the development of organic life in a zone that is nearly 3,000 feet lower than that to which it attains in the equinoctial region of the Cordilleras. But the countries bordering on the equator possess another advantage, to which sufficient attention has not hitherto been directed. This portion of the surface of the globe affords in the smallest space the greatest possible variety of impressions from the contemplation of nature. Among the colossal mountains of Cundamara, of Quito, of Peru, furrowed by deep ravines, man is enabled to contemplate alike all the families of plants and all the stars of the firmament. There, at a single glance, the eye surveys majestic palms, humid forests of bambusa, and the varied species of muscae, while above those forms of tropical vegetation appear oaks, medlars, and sweetbriar, and umbelliferous plants as in our European homes. There, as the traveller turns his eyes to the vault of heaven, a single glance embraces the constellation of the Southern Cross, the Magellanic clouds and the guiding stars of the constellation of the Bear, as they circle around the Arctic pole. There the depths of the earth and the vaults of heaven display all the richness of their forms and the variety of their phenomena. There the different climates are ranged the one above the other, stage by stage, like the vegetable zones, whose succession they limit. And there the observer may readily trace the laws that regulate the diminution of heat, as they stand indelibly inscribed on the rocky walls and abrupt declivities of the Cordilleras. Not to weary the reader with the details of the phenomena which I long since endeavoured graphically to represent, I will here limit myself to the consideration of a few of the general results, whose combination constitutes the physical delineation of the torrid zone. That which, in the vagueness of our impressions, loses all distinctness of form, like some distant mountain shrouded from view by a veil of mist, is clearly revealed by the light of mind, which, by its scrutiny into the causes of phenomena, learns to resolve and analyze the different elements, assigning to each its individual character. Thus, in the sphere of natural investigation, as in poetry and painting, the delineation of that which appeals most strongly to the imagination derives its collective interest from the vivid truthfulness with which the individual features are portrayed. And I will call it that for tonight, I think. If you're interested in picking up where I've left off, as usual, you can find the original on Project Gutenberg at the link in the show notes. Although unusually I may recommend not to. It's a really difficult read, not digitized very well, and full of weird footnotes that just seem to go on forever. But if you're curious, feel free to check it out. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes were released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week, But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Sweet Night and Friends by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.